Hello, BookTube. I have some Brattle books to show you. I went to the Brattle bookshop here in Boston today in the bright, hot sunlight. Browsed around their carts, found a bunch of stuff. Uh, it's an activity I do regularly. Some of you who have been with the channel for a long time will know that. It's also an activity, as irrational as it might be, that I hope someday to do with each one of you. It's one of my favorite things to do. And I found a bunch of things that I have mentioned on this channel before and haven't, and I thought I would show them to you as sort of a vicarious way of us shopping together. The first one is a science fiction classic of a lower order. This is Ratif at Large by Keith Laumer. Hubba hubba. These are short stories that Keith Laumer did. This has to be 35, 40 years ago, 1978. Starring Ratif, who was a two-fisted diplomat in an imagined future in which there are no real men left. He's part of the diplomatic corps that is constantly parsing their semicolons, but he often comes up with solutions to the snafus that his bosses get into on his own hook, using guile and he-manliness. And some of these stories are very good. They're pulp science fiction, definitely. Then there's nothing great about them, but they can be very enjoyable. And I have never seen Keith Laumer in a trade paperback or hardcover. I don't know that I would even advise a publisher to reprint him. He's just not good enough. If you save your resources for the great science fiction authors you aren't reprinting. So I don't think I've ever seen him except in mass markets. And this one I got this back in '78, and I've been buying it. I buy it ever since. Whenever I see it, this one, I don't know if you can tell, but it's in perfect condition. It's got to stick up a shine on the cover, so it'll survive a rereading. And then another classic that I've reread many times, and it's one of those books. It's old, it's old and dusty, but it has had such an enormous print history that it's almost literally true to say that you could go a year, 10 years, finding it at used bookshops and never come across the same edition twice. It's Tales of the Alhambra by Washington Irving, by the great Washington Irving, one of my favorite American writers. I love the cover illustration. It's a black and white reproduction of a famous painting. But this one has, it's a little hardcover and has illustrations all throughout. And it's Irving talking about the Alhambra and retailing its fantasy history and all the folklore connected with it. And the reason it's had such a huge print run is because people love to buy it, either as a memento having been to the Alhambra complex, or as preparation for going. Even 20 years ago in bookstores, in the 20th century, I would have customers come up to me and say, "Do you have Tales from the Alhambra?" And I would say, "Don't tell me, let me guess, you're going there." And they would say yes. I guess it must be recommended on travel websites and whatnot, even now. But it is a masterpiece of its kind. It's a masterpiece of travel writing. And I don't have this edition, of course. I literally could go to the Brattle every week and find a different edition. So I was happy to find it. Especially since the Tales of the Alhambra that I have is one that is not very heavily illustrated. And you really want that. And then the next one is Oxford India paperbacks. This is Elephant, Days and Nights. It's the author, Raman Sukumar, spent 10 years when this book was made, actually spent a lot more than that, conducting an in-the-field natural history of the Indian elephant. And that's what this book is. It's the distillation of his work. It has lots of illustrations, and it has tons and tons of natural history about what he learned when he studied Indian elephants in the wild. It's sort of the elephant literature classic counterpart to Elephant Memories, which I'm sure I've mentioned on this channel before, and which you should all read. So I was happy to find it for $1. And then a perfect illustration of the synchronicity that rules the Brattle. They often will buy whole collections of books from people, and then those collections get boxed up and put down in the basement, and sometimes wait there for a while, and then they come back up, sometimes broken from the original icebergs and set adrift. So you'll find one book on the Brattle sale carts that seems odd, and if you've done it enough times, if you're a veteran of the place, you'll know that it means there's a good chance that other kindred books of that book are also going to appear. That doesn't make any sense, but I'll try to illustrate it. This is Crowding Memories by Mrs. Thomas Bailey Aldrich. Uh, it's a memoir that Thomas Bailey Aldrich was a great editor of the Atlantic Monthly here in Boston for about 10 years in the 1880s. And I had completely forgotten that Lil Aldrich wrote a book of her own. I'd completely forgotten that. And here it is in this lovely green thing. With it's got black and white photos, but more than that, it's got her wonderful bubbly prose. She loved being a counterpart to her daydreaming, slightly odd husband. And this book captures that perfectly. So I saw it on the carts and I thought, isn't that strange? That's wonderful, though. I mean, and my first thought was, surely if this is here, maybe somebody has the Thomas Bailey Aldrich collected works is a big shelf full of books. Most of it is poetry. He was a famous poet who's totally unknown now. We couldn't pay somebody to reprint him now. But some of those books aren't poetry, and some of them are really, really good. I confess, his poetry, a little of it goes a long way with me. But he wrote a memoir that is delightful. And he wrote a bunch of other nonfiction too that I would love to find. And when I saw this, I thought, surely I will find it. But then a minute later, I didn't find that. Instead, in what is obviously a companion volume, I found this. This is Ferris Greenslet's biography of Thomas Bailey Aldrich that was written in the white heat of grief very soon after he died, and tells all the famous anecdotes of his life that aren't famous anymore. This dreamy, distractible poet who became the editor of the Atlantic Monthly when William Dean Howells retired, and made it great. He was a very different kind of editor from Howells. Howells was a knockabout. He was from the Midwest. He was willing to take just about anything to fill up a table of contents, and he questioned its literary ability afterwards. And he grew out of that a little, but he never really abandoned the idea that the first thing you do is fill the magazine, and then you worry about Parnassus. And Thomas Bailey Aldrich had the exact opposite idea, that the magazine should be excellent, even if it suffers in terms of the size of its table of contents. It's an age-old dichotomy of editorial philosophies. We experience it in Open Letters. I'm sure that every journal, no matter how small, experiences it in some form or other. Aldrich once told a friend of his that he was kind of determined that from now on he would only publish excellent poems, for instance, in the Atlantic Monthly, which meant, he said, about 4 a year. And that didn't turn out. He didn't turn out to be that strict, but he was very strict. And his boss, Mr. Houghton, who went on to become, Houghton and Mifflin, become a titan of the publishing industry, was constantly trying to get him to publish works by Houghton's friends in the Atlantic. And Aldrich kept saying no because the works weren't good and because he didn't like the idea of it, of that kind of patronage, when he had stacks and stacks of submissions from all sorts of great literary figures that he could barely fit into the magazine. And Houghton once jokingly took him to task for it and said, "You're constantly turning these people down because they're not good enough. I swear, I'm going to send you a work under a fictitious name." And Aldrich shot right back, "Well, take my advice and submit it to a fictitious editor." And he eventually did resign because of that. But his stories about the Atlantic are fantastic. The anecdotes are incredible. And also the anecdotes about the home that he and Lil got at 79 Mount Vernon Street in Boston, which is... It was a wonderful place, full of bookish talk, and I was in there. It's condos now, and I was in one of those condos about 10 years ago, carved up from one half of the second floor. And the owners were talking about how it's such a great building, it's got such great history. They didn't know the history, they had no idea. They had no idea any of the names that I was talking about. And I wasn't going to tell them. Instead, I stood at the bow windows of their bedroom and just thought about all the things that room had seen, that the bare bones, joists, and splinters of that room had seen, that it's seen Aldrich talking with William Dean Howells or Mark Twain, that had seen them complaining about the presidential elections of people who are long dead, complaining about the swanning U.S. tour of Oscar Wilde. who had young men all over the country posing with potted sunflowers. Just all the talk that went on in that room that's gone. And that a lot of that is captured in here. And the fact that I found these two things together in a standard edition leads me to believe that a great bunch of Thomas Bailey Aldrich is coming to the Brattle sale cart. So I have something to look forward to, and you have something to dread. But that's it for now. That is just a little Brattle bouquet for you, and I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you later. Thank you, Book 2.